Yeah.
There's been a lot of stuff this week that
Finding a nice, comfortable position where you can be relaxed and yet alert. And noticing the position of your body, whether it's leaning forward or back, and trying to come to rest in the middle. And just checking in with yourself, checking in with your emotional state right now. Just noticing what's there and opening to it. And checking in on your mental state. There a lot of mental activity or not too much? Again, just allowing whatever's there to be there. And then bringing the attention into the body. And we'll begin with one sound of the bell. And becoming aware of the body breathing. All the way from the start of the in-breath through the in-breath. Any gap, and then the start of the out-breath. All the way through the out-breath. And any gap before it starts again. And doing your best to ride the waves of the breath. Not trying to control it at all. Just allowing the breath to be exactly as it is. Allowing the body to be exactly as it is. And noticing that you're the one who's aware of the sensations of breathing. So doing your best to maintain that sense of the witness, the awareness. As you observe the breath. And noticing any resistance in your experience. It could be bracing in the body, or it could be wanting things to be different than they are, or any sense of needing to figure anything out, or do anything. Whenever you notice that resistance, doing your best to let it go. It doesn't mean it will stop, but inviting it to stop. And allowing whatever happens to happen. Really surrendering to the moment. And while doing your best to keep the focus on the body breathing, you may notice thoughts in the background, and those thoughts may be quite sticky. They may be pulling on your attention. You may want to figure something out or plan something. So do your best to let go of that pull. You don't need to know. You don't need to figure anything out. You don't need to plan anything. You're just resting in the not knowing, resting in the sensations of breathing. And whenever any thoughts or anything else outside your focus range do manage to draw you out and you find yourself in forgetfulness, and then at some point you remember, oh, my attention's wandered, and celebrate that moment of awareness, and bring the attention back to the body breathing, back to the witness, the seat of awareness, riding the waves of the breath, and doing your best to drop any resistance in the experience. Just allowing yourself to be exactly as you are. If there's restlessness or sleepiness, if there's tension or difficult emotions, feel angry or despair, fear, anxiety, sadness, just allowing that to be, allowing yourself to be right here, right now. And the mind naturally defends against anything unpleasant, anything unwanted. It tells you need to figure out what to do, but you don't. It's just your personal mind. Just rest in the not knowing. Gee, what's going to happen tomorrow? Don't know. I wonder if I'll be safe from COVID. Don't know. I wonder how much longer it'll be around. Don't know. I wonder if I'll ever learn to let go. Don't know. Whatever question the mind wants you to answer, just say, don't know. Smile to it, open to it, to the not known. Watch it all from the safe place of the witnessed, the awareness. Continuing to focus on the body breathing. And with the sound of the bell, we'll bring this meditation to a close. So, massaging anything that needs massaging or stretching or whatever you need to do to bring kindness to the body. Taking good care of yourself. And does anyone want to share about that experience?
I will. Had a really it was a really pleasant experience because in the other room, Steve is having a choir practice. So he was doing his warm-up exercises.
Hmm.
So I was noticing that when he started doing his warm-up exercises, at first there was a thought of um, as if it was a distraction. And
Hmm.
then I just followed his warm-up exercises, and it just made me smile and made me happy, and my attention was totally focused.
Good.
So it was just, I don't know, taking in what was there. It was great.
Mm, great. Thanks, Heidi. Anyone else? Mm,
Lori, I had a strange experience.
yeah.
Um, it was a feeling of paranoia. And I mean, I've had this before, but it's not a common feeling for me. So just at the beginning, um, when we just started to meditate, like people looking at me,
Hmm.
and I left my eyes open, feeling paranoid about people looking at me, and then that kind of went up a bit. You said smile, and I allowed the feeling. So paranoid of, people what? Thinking I'm stupid, laughing at me, I'm weird because I'm meditating, looking at me while I'm meditating, what kind of expressions on my face, and
Right.
just sort of let it. Okay, so let them laugh at me. And then it just kind of went away because it
Right.
felt like, oh, that's stupid. They're not laughing at me. I don't know. Just allowed it.
So you had paranoia about people seeing your face, or people like
Yeah.
during the okay. And then you said you allowed it. Did you do anything in particular?
I guess kind of allowing myself to to go with it. So what does that mean? People are laughing at me. Okay, is that the worst thing that can happen? Okay, let them.
Okay. So you brought up thoughts uh to like positive thinking basically, or sort of CBT type
Well,
thoughts like, is this
it's
fear
like worst
real?
case scenario. Yeah, like worst case scenario. Okay, is that
Mm,
what it means? What's the thing that I'm worried the most of? Let that
right.
happen.
Yeah.
It's not positive thinking. It's more worst case.
Right. Right. Okay. Yeah. It's the I mean yeah, maybe it's not positive thinking. I guess it's kind of checking your assumption, right? You've got this sense that it's going to be really bad, but then you're kind of showing yourself how it's not that bad.
I wasn't trying to show myself that. I was trying to allow myself to, instead of resisting, to just sort of experience what I was experiencing because I was
Right.
feeling paranoia.
Right. Right.
So okay, so feel it.
Yeah. Yeah. Was there? Did you notice any resistance in your experience? Like any bracing in the body, or not wanting things to be different?
I guess I don't know, not a lot.
Hmm. So when the paranoia came up, you open to it. You kind of were just open to
No, not at the beginning. I tried
it.
to. Took a while.
Yeah. 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 So there was some resistance there. Uh,
Oh, there was a lot.
yeah.
That's why I was kind of, oh, okay. So if they're gonna, do whatever, then let it happen. And then that's when I started to relax.
Hmm. Yeah.
Isn't that
And
what allowing means?
yeah, generally allowing means relaxing. It means allowing means dropping the resistance, basically,
Okay.
right? So it's generally helpful to see the resistance, as clearly as you can. But I mean, even just noticing that, oh, okay, there's this paranoia. And so I'm not, even without identifying the resistance, like where exactly it is, that there's some, right? That you're finding it unpleasant. And so you're, um, it sounds like there was an invitation there to open to it, right? And that invitation, like there doesn't even have to be a thought with it. It could just be, in the will, right? Just or an intention, right? So it can be very subtle how you open to it, right? Or it could be
Yeah.
strong. It could be like saying to yourself, yes, let me experience it, right? Or it could just be
Yeah.
this sense, there's just this sense of an intention to open, to allow. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, this is why it's so important to practice, because there's no, I could say a word, but how that word, I could say yes, but I mean, in your experience, could, it could take on some different experience, right? You could say yes, but you could still be like bracing like crazy, right? So, so but it sounds like there was definitely like a letting go of resistance there, right? Um, so yeah, it's very, very interesting. Thank you. Um, so how about the home practice? So this week I had actually printed out the home practice and I left it downstairs. But this week, basically, we had, continue working with the small stuff. We had the meditation, which was open awareness. We had notice when your model of reality is challenged. And we had see why you do it, which is if you want to see why you do something, stop doing it. And it will become apparent why you were doing it. um, so, any reports on the home practice this week? Any of those things? I'm sure stuff happened. Maybe someone who hasn't shared for a while. Nothing interesting, no obstacles, no questions.
Okay, I'll start it.
Thanks, Eleanor.
Um, all those home practices, yeah, I just was seeing it. I was seeing. I I don't have a specific example, but I was really seeing how I'm a bit like that. Was it the lion in the cage? Was
Right, the lion
there
and
a
the
lion
bear.
in a cage?
Yeah, yeah.
I could really see how I'm a lion in a cage, how you set your own, um, what I can do. It's kind of like where's my comfort zone,
Mhm.
and really, and especially now with COVID, um, even though it, it I wonder how many people are going to develop agoraphobia from from COVID, because that's a question that I have, because you can get a certain comfort
Mhm.
in being at home and then venturing out of home. Is that kind of like the lion in the cage, or am I
So
totally off base here?
yeah, I mean, the lion in the cage is just the idea um, that you feel protected, uh, uh, and not realize that that you're limited by your cage, right? So the cage both protects and limits. I'm not sure if that's what you're referring to, or if you're referring more to the analogy of the dog, the electronic dog fence, where when you get close to the edge, you notice discomfort.
Yeah, but I saw similarities in that. I don't know if there are really, but I did see similarities in, I kind of interpreted it as, I have a pretty, you have a, a comfort zone, and the second that you are challenged to go out of that
Yeah.
comfort
So
zone.
why don't let's take it down to the concrete, because it's always much easier when it's a concrete example. So like it sounds like you went, like there's a fear for you of going outside, that came up at some point.
Oh, going outside,
Yeah.
like because of COVID?
Well, yeah, that's what you were talking about.
Yeah, I'm affected by COVID. Yes, yes.
And
I'm
there's
not saying, I don't know if I'll get agoraphobia, but I know my mother had it. My
right,
mother
but
had a bit of it, so I'm a little bit of like
right,
a touch of
but
that.
right, but
So I'm in touch with agoraphobia, but yeah,
but
I'm sorry. Go on.
I really want to bring it just to what you experienced, right?
Oh, what I experienced.
Yeah.
Well, I am the most comfortable when I'm at home now.
Mhm.
Like going out of my home, except if I go out for a walk in my area, or I have certain limitations, but then going into somebody else's home
Mhm.
is can be problematic for me. I mean, I'm talking about people who have me in their bubble, even like my kids have
Right,
me in their
right.
bubble.
So you,
But I presently am not that comfortable
right,
going
right.
into their home because
Yeah,
of where they've been, or who they've been in touch with.
right. So let's take it away from the outer and focus on the inner, right? So you're sometimes in situations where, because of uh, of COVID, you feel maybe some fear. I'm not sure what you,
Yeah, well,
so what,
I can actually be specific in saying that one day my son texted me and asked me, "Do you want to come over tomorrow?"
mhm,
And right away, it was almost like that to me.
right,
It
right,
was almost because this is my son,
right. So this,
like that's the thing too. It's not like a stranger saying, or a friend saying, "Do you want to come over?" This was my son, and
right.
I'm
So
and I want to see the family, and like and
yeah,
but
so
I had that feeling.
right.
I got that feeling in me.
Yeah. So what you're describing sounds to me like you had sort of a thought of, this is my son, and I really, you know, can't or don't want to say no. But on the other hand, you had this fear come up that if you see him, you know, bad things can happen. So
Well,
how did you,
it was definitely, I felt it.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
I felt like it wasn't
right,
thought, it was a feeling of discomfort.
right, right. Um, so how did you practice with it? Did you notice, oh, this is a disturbance, this is something I can practice with, or did that not come up?
Well, yeah, yes and no. I don't think I was really that good at the practice. I've even gotten better since that was Saturday. So I've gotten better with this since Saturday. But but uh, but I did think about it. I did, like, it was more thinking like, what am I really so afraid of? Like, and then I started rationalizing. I
Right,
started
right.
like,
Oh,
my mental health is more important than COVID. Like, I have to see
Yeah.
my family, like, so I went into the thinking mind, and I guess I engaged in it. I
Yeah,
engaged,
you were caught in figuring it out.
yeah,
You were quite
yeah.
the thought.
And I did go over there, but I kind of set limits, and I
Yeah,
had
yeah,
boundaries. And I also, oh no, you know what I did? I mentioned it to my son
right.
the next day when I spoke to him before I went over, and I said, I don't know. I'm just I'll just come over for an hour because
Right.
I'm not that comfortable with what's
Right.
going on with COVID, you
Right.
know?
But in terms of in terms of the practice, I mean, um, um, of course, the practice in that situation would be to, first of all, this is where don't know really could come in handy, because you can say to yourself, gee, I'm not sure what to do here. And then just rest and not going, oh, don't know. Right. You just say,
And
don't know.
that's that would have been
Don't-
the R&R practice, right?
The R&R
That
practice.
would have been the R&R practice.
Yeah, because
I did not do it for that. No.
yeah, because what the don't know allows you to do is to release the pull of the energy, right? The mind is saying, oh gee, I don't know what I'm going to do. I need to figure this out. Should I go? Should I not go? If I, should I, all this trying to figure it out stuff, which you just described, and and that's natural. That's how our minds work, right? And it's very sticky. It sounds like you can attest to how strong that pull is, and and just by saying don't know, it's a good way to release the pull of the energy, right? And just, because then it's like, oh, don't know, right? And then you just
And
relax.
that's like allowing, right? That's allowing what's
Um,
happening. No?
well, not exactly. Like that's the difference between the relax and the release, right? Relax is more the allowing. Relax is, I'm gonna drop the resistance. I'm gonna just allow whatever's here to be here. But at the same time, the pull of the thoughts is something that there's an actual, like, letting go there. There's an actual, you have to make a decision to withdraw your attention basically from the thoughts, right? Um, or at least stop believing them, right? Stop trying to figure it out. They're telling you need to figure it out, to stop trying to figure it out. And so by saying don't know, by having this idea of, it wants me to, my personal mind wants me to figure this out. I don't need to figure it out. I can just rest in not knowing. Not, because the mind tells you, you have to know. You have to know. And then it's saying, no, I don't have to know. I can, because not knowing is uncomfortable, right? So can you rest in the discomfort of not knowing? Can you just get comfortable with not knowing, right? And that's a really effective way to release the flow of the thoughts.
Does that lead to problem solving? Does that lead to being able to get answers, or that's not relevant?
Well, no, the idea is that there are two things going on at once. There's the outer problem and there's the inner problem. Sometimes the outer problem is an illusion, right? Somebody says something, or the outer problem is that it's raining. Well, there's nothing you can do to fix that, right? Or the outer problem is that somebody said something yesterday, or you're remembering something from your past. Well, you can't change the past, right? So sometimes there's just an inner problem, but there's always an appearance of an outer problem, right? Even when it's the past, we blame the past, and we see that as an outer thing, and we start anyway. So in this situation, there was the outer problem of, my son's invited me, what am I going to do? And then there's the inner problem, which is that it stirred up all this fear in you, right? And so the idea is to say, oh, I have these two things, outer and inner. I'm going to deal with the inner to start. Even though my mind is screaming to deal with the outer, I'm going to deal with the inner, because then I'll have a better perspective for dealing with the outer. Plus, that's part of it. And the actual bigger part of it is, I don't want to store this because I want to be happy. I want to be happier, I want to cultivate happiness. So I don't want to store this stuff. I want to release it. That's my top priority right now. I don't need to figure out what to do about going to visit my son in this moment. What I need to do in this moment is stop defending against this fear and stop trying to figure it out, which is defending, right? That's why you're trying to figure it out, to try and make the discomfort stop, right? So it's saying, oh no, I'm gonna relax. I'm gonna allow myself to feel this, and I'm gonna stop trying to figure it out. I'm gonna just be happy not knowing. Not that outer problem. I'll get to it. I'll get to it. Not now. Right? Now I can just rest in not knowing. And I can watch it all from the seat of awareness. I can be the witness to what's going on in my experience. Right? And actually, in one of in the last chapter, the chapter 16, Nikki talks about how relaxing is how you avoid closing, right? Because as soon as the fear comes up, like, then the heart closes, right? And you're in kind of self-preservation mode, basically, right? As opposed to being in a more giving mode. So it's a really good example. It's a really good example of how these things play out. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
How about other folks? Anyone if you're thinking of sharing, but you're noticing some disturbance, relax. And then maybe go through the fear and share. Don't let it stop you. I know you must have practiced this week, right?
Sorry, how could you not practice this week? Like, this was a week that was like watching a train wreck or something, like just what was happening in the world. I can't, I'm sorry. I just kept getting involved in watching this train wreck that was happening, this breaking news that was not a breaking news and then it would break and it would be over. It was one ongoing drama that was going on with our neighbors in the south. And yeah, it was really, how could you not practice with that going on? Like, that was such an interesting way of looking at it. It's like you can't look away, and yet it's not pleasurable, and it's not even real because you're watching something on a TV screen. Like, it's real, but is it impacting me sitting in my house right now?
So how do you practice with it? How did you practice with it?
How did I practice with it? First of all, recognizing it, and then secondly, making conscious decision to disengage, and going to and actually shifting activities, and just recognizing, and also really looking into this whole inquiry of, I remember I took this training where they said this, the mind is a meaning making machine. Like, you stick something in front of it and all it's going to do is try to figure out some sort of meaning to it. And I have an image of cogs and wheels and everything, and it just never bloody stops. So
and it's interesting that exactly is chapter 14, right? How we create this model by we get fixated on something, we cling to it, right? We get fixated on it, and then we try and make sense of it, right? And we build our psyche out of these things, right? Because, you know, however we make sense of it, that goes into that becomes a building block of our mind that says, oh, this should be like that, or that should be like this, or this is like this, or I like this, or I don't like that, right? Which is all the sense making that you're talking about. So this sense making is what Mickey talks about in chapter 14. This is building our model, right? Our model is it's our self-concept, right? It's our preferences, it's our views, it's all that sort of stuff. So I wonder, Heidi, if you practice relax, release, lean back at all with any of this.
I think so. I think I may not use those terms. I may use pure free forever, which is something that means is more meaningful. But the practice for me was to kind of get into the don't know mind, you know, don't know.
Yeah.
Like don't know. Like who knows what's going to happen? Like everybody, my stepmother used to always talk about sports announcers. My dad was a sports, and she would call them the yackers. So this week there was an ongoing yacker show going on with everybody, very little concrete, a lot of assumptions and a lot of could go here and it could go there. And so I guess where I went is to go, maybe that's the relax and to just go into don't know. Let's see.
Yeah.
Don't know.
Well, don't know is definitely the release part. It's the letting go of the thoughts. And then you said, what was the phrase you used for what you practiced?
Pure free forever.
Pure free forever. So that sounds kind of transcendent, but it sounds like there's a dropping resistance there.
There's a dropping resistance. There's a getting into that space of being the watcher of everything that's going on, and just in that space being free from the focusing in the macro thing of focusing in on this problem and focusing in on that problem, and just sitting in that space of going, wow. It was kind of like a wow. Like,
so it sounds like it's just a different description of a very similar practice.
Yeah, but I think you have to, I mean, for me, I just had to get to that overload point where I finally kind of went, okay, enough. You know?
Yeah.
And Eleanor, I want to also acknowledge that, you know, family. Steve is addicted to CNN. The bloody thing is on all day long, you know. So at a certain point, like I have to be able to, it can still be going on outside, but inside I have to find some release from it all, you know, because it's a little challenging.
Yeah. Thanks, Heidi. Mark, yeah.
So I found this week, since I'm becoming more aware of the disturbances, minor and moderate, and sometimes, you know, larger ones, I'm finding I'm getting worn out as you know, I fall into another disturbance and I have to bring my you know, relax and release, and then I fall into another disturbance, and then I fall into another disturbance, and so there's a weariness that sets in because it seems relentless, and you know, we were talking about the politics in the U.S. and that is an overwhelming weariness that, in addition to the pandemic, which is an overwhelming weariness, and so I don't know if my mild disturbances become moderate because I'm already in tune to notice disturbance, you know.
Yeah.
Like you're just generally pissed off all the time about everything because everything is sort of a disturbance. So suddenly disturbances sort of melt into each other.
Yeah, there could be a number of different things going on. So like one is, if you're pulling thorns out all the time, you're going to be sore, right? So like, you know, when you first start doing it. Another thing I notice sometimes when I'm, you know, practicing the relax, release, lean back, that even though I'm saying relax, release, lean back, and I'm practicing relaxing, and I'm practicing not getting pulled into it, and I'm practicing moving into the seat of awareness, there's still a trying to control, right? And to the extent that I'm trying to control, like to make things relax, to make things happen a certain way, then there's a lot of effort, and it feels it is exhausting, right? And so one thing to watch for maybe is just, am I just am I am I more doing something or more dropping doing something? Because the idea is that we're dropping doing stuff. We're dropping the effort involved in the resistance, as opposed to trying to, create a certain experience, trying to create relaxation, or trying to create, um, trying to make the difficult emotion go away or something like that. So it you know it should feel more, um, uh, well, relaxing, right? It should feel more like a decrease in effort as you drop the resistance. So that's something to notice, because all this stuff is very subtle in the sense that, you can be, like I've noticed in my experience, that sometimes when I practice relax release, there's still, there is that wanting, and it's not a dropping, it's a pushing, right? And that's and I start feeling tense, and I'm like, what's going on here? And it's like, all right, just like, just stop, just stop, just stop trying to control this thing, right? Because my mind always wants to control, like really, really wants to control, and I just go into that control mode, even when, sometimes even when, when I'm practicing, uh, letting go of resistance. It's still, you know, there's often that wanting to control. Um, and the other thing is that just because it's something new, it it it's always hard to, there's always effort in learning something new, right? Because you're not just sort of, um, doing something by muscle memory, if you will. You're having to think about how to do it, and that's effortful, right? That's exhausting, having to think about how to do the technique. And there's no way to avoid that when you're learning something, right? So, and that's a big reason why it's so important to practice, and to practice with the small stuff, because it takes a while until this becomes, second nature, until you don't have to think, oh, what do I do now? What do I do now? Um, so I don't know if any of those resonate with you.
Yeah, I think the sense of trying to get it right, the sense of achievement is a player in the relaxing and releasing. Um, on another note, I did have a kind of a challenging of the mind model experience, where I was planning to do things and I had to say what I was doing, and I was concerned about, I was afraid of saying what I was going to do, and I noticed that resistance, but I just said what I needed to do, and I was expecting opposition, and there was no opposition.
Mhm.
And so on two levels, my assumptions were misplaced. I was free to speak my mind, and I was whatever I had to say was instantly approved without
Mhm.
opposition. And I thought, oh, that's a good example of how I create these fictitious expectations, assumptions, perceptions, which in fact are illusory, and I just move forward through this ease into doing what I said I had to do.
Mhm.
Anyways,
Yeah, it sounds, you really like went through your fear there, right? You saw that you were afraid, and you said, I'm doing it anyway.
yeah.
That's great, great training. Yeah.
Speaking of training, I play a bit of guitar, and I read great line that was, "It's not about learning how to play the guitar; it's about learning how to practice the guitar.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And that's what we're doing, right? It's, treat it as a game. What's important is not, can I let this go? What's important is, what can I learn from this? Right? And, and you tend to learn more from when you run into obstacles than when you just sort of smoothly go through it.
Thank
So,
you.
yeah. Yeah, Nancy?
So I tend to avoid the news. Not because I don't want to be informed. I just, before our neighbors to the south went, all this shit started, with all the COVID stuff, I was like, oh my gosh, I just can't take it anymore. They're not saying anything new. It's all kind of whatever. So I just kind of stopped listening. So am I avoiding because I was annoyed, or like, I don't know if that's a healthy, or if it's just a personal thing that I don't not care. I just can't be bothered. I don't know if that sounds rude or not, but
it's totally up to you. And you're describing something outer, right? Do I watch this? Or do I
yeah,
not watch this? So
but it's
the issue, like from a practice perspective, the issue is, well, what's going on inside? What thoughts and emotions are coming up? Is there a disturbance? Like, I would like to be able to watch the news, but it's uncomfortable, so I don't watch it. Or is it just, I don't want to go there. Like, I'm just comfortable with, this is not what I want to do. I mean, I've spent long chunks of time at Plum Village getting no news at all. And that was a
yeah.
really nice thing,
And
right?
I lived, yeah. And I
So
I do
I
have
wasn't
a
avoiding something, but,
yeah.
so it, did you notice any disturbance coming up around that?
No,
No.
I don't. I often get messages from a friend who actually lives in the States, and I do get disturbed when he perpetuates with like the message upon message about most things COVID related, but I don't. So I did at one point say, can you please just stop sending me this? Because it was just, I don't know if it was a disturbance or again, just a personal thing because
Well,
he was just pissing me off.
if you were being pissed off, that's a disturbance.
Yeah.
So then the issue is, what do you do with that? What do you do with that? How do you practice with that? Right? Because it sounds like actually it sounds like small stuff, because there's really nothing for you to do.
It
They've
is
said this
exactly.
thing. They've said this thing. You notice a disturbance come up. You notice you're pissed off. And so then what do you do with that? Right?
Yeah, I just don't engage now, but
Right.
or
But in the moment when,
in the moment, yeah,
'cause
in the
don't-
moment. And now I am getting better at just putting my phone down and walking away, but not as in a ignoring
Yeah.
way. It's in a, it's
Yeah.
okay.
Right. So again, that's outer.
Yeah.
Putting your phone down is not going on in your mind and heart.
No,
right?
but
So,
in that whole process, I am able to be kind of non-reactionary, that to the point where I can't
Yeah.
control it. So it's
yeah, and I hope I'm really like pressing this point, but
no, yeah,
again,
yeah,
there's no such thing as being non-reactive. The strategy to deal with a reaction is not to be non-reactive, because you don't have the power to flick a switch and turn it off, right? So if you look closely, something's happening there. Either you're defending, or you're opening, or you're opening to it, right?
yeah,
And so it's a matter of looking when it actually comes up, when your friend says something and it bothers you, like, what do you do in that moment, right? And the what we're trying to practice here is that is noticing that there's a disturbance and having that awareness to say, oh, there's a disturbance here. What do I want to do? Inner. What do I want to do inside with this disturbance? Right? Because the mind goes to, what am I going to do outside? That's how we're trained,
Yeah.
right? That's our habit of mind. What are we going
Yeah.
to do outside, right? And the mind also goes to result, which you've illustrated, which is, I don't want to have this reaction, so I'll just be non-reactive. The mind is deluding itself because it, you know, and all of our people, everybody does this, right? So I'm not picking on you, but I'm just,
No.
I'm really trying to get to, like, what to noticing, like, there's a disturbance, what is going on inside, what can I do inside, right? And get
Yeah,
off.
no, I'm
Yeah.
definitely defending.
Yeah. So, you know, that's when, and when you, if you, you know, in the moment, if you notice you're defending, then, you know, the relaxed part is actually pretty simple, right? Not easy, but it's,
Defending. Yeah.
yeah, to just like relax. I don't need to
Yeah.
stop this. Let me just feel it. Where do I feel it? Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. What's it
You
doing?
just helped me figure out 20 years of a friendship. Thank you. Yeah.
Well, again, there's no comment on, you know,
No,
what to do with the friendship.
no, but it's going back to chapter when it talks about building something. I don't know if it was chapter 12 or 11 or 12-ish.
Building the house in the middle of the sunlit field, that one?
And
Anyway, that one or the one after.
It doesn't matter.
Probably.
Anyways, yeah. And it was, well, almost like the thorn thing. So this goes back to like when we were in university together, and he always had to be right. And so I would always get annoyed with it. And I'm literally reacting the exact same way I did back then. When, who cares if he always has to be right? Just let him be right or wrong. It doesn't really matter. It doesn't affect me. So, yeah.
Well, and it's a nice game to play too. Like, you know, this is like, if you, you know, when Mickey talked about, if you want to see why you do something, stop doing it. So, you know, you resist, you know, it sounds like there's a pattern that's playing out here where you, I forget exactly what you said, but where, you know, where you don't want them to be right, or you don't want, or you want to be right, or something like that. So, you know, to stop doing it would be to just say, I want them to be right. You know?
Yeah.
Let me just pretend that I want them to be right. And then what happens, right?
Yeah.
And
oh, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Oh, you just made my night. Thank you.
You know, it's amazing how often, like, I do this too, where, you know, it's like, oh, I know they want this thing, and there's no way I'm giving it to them. And it's like, what if you said, oh, I know they want this thing, so I'm giving it to them. So I'm giving
so
it
much
to
easier.
them, right?
Yeah.
That's quite an approach.
Amazing, really.
You know, what have I lost by giving it to them? Probably nothing.
No.
Probably it's just a nice thing to do.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, so we probably should start covering the chapters a little after 8 o'clock. And you know, if you want to move your body, feel free to move your body, stand up or whatever. So anyway, I'll just go into, I wanted to actually start, instead of starting with chapter 14, I want to start with chapter 15, which is the path of unconditioned happiness, which is where we started the evening as we were waiting for people to all join. Where are we? So yeah, all of our lives, Mickey says, our samskaras have been telling us when we should be happy, right? Our samskaras, that's our preferences. We like this, we don't like that. We think things should be like this, we don't think things should be like that. So then when things are in accordance with our preferences, we're happy. When things are not in accordance with our preferences, our mind says, oh no, I can't be happy now. I'm going to be unhappy because it's raining. I'm going to be unhappy. because this person said this thing. I'm going to be unhappy because they didn't, my boss isn't treating me well. I'm going to be unhappy because fill in the blank, right? And so what comes out of that is that it's our mind that tells us to be unhappy. It's not the outside. The outside world doesn't tell us to be unhappy. It's our mind that says, I don't like what's going on, therefore I'm not going to be happy, right? And for that reason, that's why Mickey says happiness is a choice, right? It's a choice to the extent that we can see that process happening, right? That we can really notice how the mind is telling us not to be happy, how the mind is telling us to close our hearts, right? When things are not as we want. And so he says the cure for this is to like everything, right? To make a choice that says, you know what? I'd rather be happy than not happy. And so it's always my choice whether I'm going to be happy or not, because it's all going on in the mind. It's my mind. So happiness is not an external thing, it's an internal thing, right? So so I'm going to decide that there is no situation in which I don't want to be happy. I want to be happy regardless of what is going on. Okay. And set that really, really strong intention, that ironclad intention. Of course, you won't be able to be happy in every circumstance because we have all these samskaras. We have all these preferences, right? And what we're trying to do is release them. But in the meantime, it's really helpful to notice that. And I find that this perspective really helps me identify when I'm closing, and really helps me to see that happiness, that there's a big element of choice there. So like the other day, I got this thing in the mail from the city of Toronto saying that it was a bill from the tax department for $65 or something like that. And I was like, and it said it had something to do with permit parking. And I was like, permit parking? Like they send me a bill every year for like $500 and I pay it. And I don't see what this thing is. So I called them up and she said, oh, well, there was $7 in interest because last year you paid the parking fee late. There was $7 in interest. And I said, okay, and what's the other $57? Well, that's the charge to add it to the tax. That's a fee for adding it to the tax. And I said, why did you add it to the tax? I would have just paid it. Well, we sent you an invoice in November. And I said, well, I never got that. Well, I'm sorry. And I was like, so pissed. And I was like, this is completely unfair, right? Like, how can you do this? And I was getting really upset. And then I stopped and I thought, is this worth losing my happiness over? And it was like, clearly not, right? $65, it's not worth giving away my happiness for $65, right? Never mind the fact that there's no way they're giving me back the $65. It's a complete bureaucracy. Like she said to me, the city council would have to change the legislation. We have our hands tied. No one has authority. This is what the legislation said. So I'm like, okay. And so I really had to compose myself, right? But that thinking about it in terms of giving away my happiness was so helpful to me in being like, yeah, this is just, this is setting off, like, this idea of injustice has always been very powerful in me, right? This is why I became a gay rights advocate, right? Because I was like, this is totally unfair and there's no way I'm standing for this. And I'm dedicating my life to fixing this, right? So like, that's how strong, like my model, that part of my model is really strong. That says injustice cannot be allowed. I cannot stand for injustice, right? And that came up against this like $65 bill with this completely bureaucratic organization that, you know, like who mails invoices these days, right? And anyway, and has no way to see them electronically. Yeah, I found it really useful, this idea of giving away my happiness. And it's, you know, I can give you other examples where it's come up, you know, where I'll notice myself getting upset and I'll say, is this worth closing? Is this worth giving away my happiness? Right? And it makes me think of a story by the Dalai Lama tells of you know, a monk who did not leave Tibet and who was tortured by the Chinese, and then subsequently released and came to Dharamsala, and he was asked, like, what was the hardest thing about being in prison all these years? And he said, well, the hardest thing was that I was so worried that they were going to that I was going to lose my compassion for my jailer, for my torturer, right? Because I don't want to give that away, right? I don't want to give away my compassion. I don't want to give away my happiness, right? Yes, I'm in jail. Yes, I'm being tortured for basically no reason, but I'm not giving away my happiness, right? And that's the kind of determination that Mickey's talking about. And obviously that's way up, way up there, right? But it's yeah, Elizabeth? Yeah.
So is that an auxiliary kind of exercise? That is not exactly relaxing. It's a way that we have of talking to ourselves and reminding ourselves of a deep intention to be happy. But you see, it sounds, when you describe that, it sounds like what we all do, which is to talk ourselves out of our disturbance.
I actually, you can look at it that way, although it's not talking me out of my disturbance. It's helping me to recognize that there is a disturbance, right? It's helping me to recognize that I want to let this go. So it's kind of a precursor to practice. It's a recognition thing. But flipping it around, it's actually that the highest intention is to stay happy, to stay open, to keep my heart open, right? It's not always happy. Sometimes it's just keeping my heart open through like someone dying or something like that, right? Through a big loss. So it's not always like smiley face happy. It's sometimes, but to keeping your heart open. And I see Susan, I see you raise your hands. Well, it's really the guiding light, which is I never want to lose my happiness, right? I never want to close my heart. And relax, release, lean back is just a method to accomplish that. And Mickey actually says in this chapter, like, this is the highest path. And, you know, use it as your guide and figure out, you know, just work with it. He often says, work with it to, you know, whatever works for you. He does say relax, release is the highest way to work with it. But in a way, relax, release is it's a tool, but the unconditional happiness is the goal, right? The not giving away your happiness is really, in a sense, a higher order intention, right? So,
But I gave you an example, Lori, and I said, well, I had this disturbance, and then I thought, I'm not going to let this disturbance take away my happiness. I think you would say that I was defending, that I was not relaxing, that I was trying to solve the problem by telling myself that.
yeah, and
Tell the difference.
yeah, the difference is in the experience, right? So you can say I'm not giving away my happiness, and then you can try and force an experience, right? You can try and you can use any phrase to try and force a result, right? The mind has a wonderful ability
Yeah.
to trick itself, to use any, no matter what the phrase is, no matter what the instruction is, it can take the nicest and the best instruction and it can turn it into a hammer, right? So it always comes down to how am I actually using this? What is going on in my experience? When I use this, is the resistance dropping, or am I trying to force something? Right? So it's true. You could have this really high intention of I'm not giving away my happiness, and your mind could twist it into this suppression, right, of not feeling anything else. That's possible. But
Lori, I get the feeling that all of us are more or less in the same boat, except for maybe Jennifer, who last week you gave a beautiful example of how this thing resolved for you. But I think the rest of us are not getting it. I'm not getting it. I am back and forth with trying to let go as a solution to the disturbance. And
yeah,
all the examples tonight, I've just heard confusion. This is very subtle, but I must say that I've gone over the examples with you, and I listen to people, and you go over the examples, and it's very clear when in retrospect, but in the moment it's damn hard.
yes, it is. It is, because the mind is so tricky, and what it all comes down to is it's about surrender. It's about dropping the resistance, right? And any time that, so the thing to be, to watch for is, am I going am I going with the flow, or am I trying to make something happen? Have I let go of control, or am I still trying to maneuver things?
I
Right?
don't think I have ever let go of control yet. And it's how many weeks now? 5 weeks? I don't
5
know.
weeks.
Anybody say that they're getting it? Are they,
I don't know. Let's see.
I don't know. It's, yeah, you are, Jen, are you?
Well, what I mean by I'm getting it is I understand the intent of the practice, but actually I've been like wrestling with wanting to share, and I've just been practicing listening because I want to give other people an opportunity to share. But every day, today I found it very difficult when my husband came upstairs and told me that there was a that the premier announced a state of emergency, and I want to be succinct and quick. So I understand the intent of the practice, but it is very difficult. And so my experience today was, it was a very subtle drop in energy, not subtle, it was a drop in energy. And I wanted to practice with it. I was looking in my body, where is this? I had this attachment, like I want to find where it is in my body so I can find the resistance and let it go. And I found it frustrating that I couldn't, and I was very sad. And then I had my consult with Lori yesterday. So then I had this idea, just notice who's noticing. And I was able to do that. And that's all I was able to do. So it didn't dissolve. It didn't. So I guess when I put up my hand, I'm getting it. I'm understanding the practice, but it is very hard.
Yeah. And it is very hard. I mean, I've been practicing, I've been practicing mindfulness for a long time. I've been practicing this for, I guess, 3.5 years. you know, pretty diligently. And, you know, the mind is very tricky, right? And the real progress, if you will, or this more the aha thing, comes from letting go of the idea that I'm going to like be able to make myself feel better in the moment, because that's not what it's about. You know, what it's about is being able to open to the experience, not to make it, not to change it, right? And so that's it's really, you know, I think I certainly had this experience too of like banging my head against the wall for a while, wanting to be able to change the experience, wanting to be able to, you know, have the samskara release, right? Um, and and it's really it that might be the result over time, but it cannot be the intention in the moment, because it winds up being counterproductive. You wind up trying to force instead of letting go of the resistance, because it's not about letting go of the disturbance, it's about letting go of the resistance. And letting go of the resistance is you know, again, it's like, you know, Mickey talks in chapter 16 about using our will, and it's sort of like internal hands that are trying to, you know, defend. And it's about, you know, leaving the hands at the side. It's like, you know, life wants to punch you in the face. It's about keeping your hands at your side and letting life punch you in the face, right? Not quite that bad, but I mean, this is basically, and so it's about surrender, you know, and maybe surrender is a better word than letting go, because, um, you know, and it's always like, how am I trying to manipulate the moment? However I'm trying to manipulate the moment, that's resistance. So however I'm trying to manipulate the moment, drop it, you know, and often it's, you know, and like I said with Mark, you know, sometimes when I'm saying relax, release, lean back, I'm trying to manipulate the moment. So then I got to stop doing that, right? And it's just noticing and noticing and noticing where I'm trying to control things, and then dropping that, right? And you can't even always drop it, right? Like I got this, you know, tension around my heart, and I can relax around the area, but in the center of it, it doesn't just relax. I mean, sometimes it does, but I can't control it, you know, and I can't control my thoughts. So it is, you know, I get your frustration, you know, and all I can say is 5 weeks is a short time, you know. Really, this course should be a lot longer. You know, we should have like a 16-week practice period. But I don't know if anyone would sign up for it if it was 16 weeks. And that's why people take it multiple times, because it really does. 6 weeks is too short.
So Lori, these phrases, I want to go back to the question that was asked about the use of these phrases.
Yeah.
Like whatever, like either using relax and release, or using what was another one of, is it worth my happiness, or, you know, like whatever this is. It reminds me of using a mantra. And the meaning of mantra is mind release. So you're not actually trying to solve the problem, you're trying to release your mind from dealing with the problem.
Yeah,
So
and mantra is something very different, and Mickey talks about it. Mickey talks about three ways to practice letting go: mantra, positive psychology, and relax, release, lean back, right? And he basically says mantra and positive psychology work to a certain point, but if you really want to let go, you need to do the relaxing. You need to let it in. The mantra helps to keep our mind from going, bad places. But You know, at the end of the day, he says, it's about, you know, the only way to let it in is to relax, you know, to stop exerting the will. Um, so mantra can, you know, and
I meant more along the intention of the mantra, because why does relax, release not become a mantra?
because it's not a mantra. It's not a mantra at all. It is a shorthand to remember what to do in the moment. But it is not, you don't say relax, release, lean back. You do relax, release, lean back. Right. And it doesn't have to be in that order, and it doesn't have to be those words. It's just it's the idea that you're relaxed, you're dropping the resistance. Release, you're letting go of the pull of the thoughts. And lean back, you're aware, uh, you're aware that you're the one who's aware. You're the one who's experiencing this. You're not the thoughts, you're not the emotions. So yeah, it's definitely not a mantra. You know, I mean, you could use it as your mantra, but saying the words will not achieve the results. You have to actually drop the resistance. You have to actually let go of the pull. You have to actually move into the seat of awareness if you're not already there. So I know there were some hands and stuff. Susan had her hand up, and Mark had his hand up.
Hi.
Hi.
I do not remember why I raised my hand when I did. It has because so many other topics came up, but maybe I'll just address Elizabeth's latest remarks, although that was not why I raised my hand. But you know, I've been listening, like I've been doing this work for almost 3 years, I think. And, you know, I listened to Mickey's talks, I think most of them. And at the end of each talk, he says, work on these things, work on these things, work on these things. And I think just recently, I have made it my like 100% my intention, not to be 90% into it or 95, but to be 100% dedicated to being aware, to noticing, to doing the R&R. And I can tell you, I do see progress. I do see, like, for some people, it may happen in 5 weeks, or for some people, it may happen in a day. I think this is very unusual, but I do feel and see, like right now, when things annoy me or irritate me, and when I feel the disturbance, I'm very much aware of it. I notice it. I can feel it in my body. And before my mind gets pulled into the situation, I can often see it, watch the mind going there and almost, and I go, woo, wait a moment. And then I go and I relax and I'm able to release, and it's kind of like I can see my reaction, and then I decide how I react to that reaction. And I would say the progress in 3 years is significant, because I'm able to not get so involved and pulled into different situations that are happening outside, and wanting to change them and wanting to control them and wanting to for the outside to change. You know, it comes back to me, to my
Yeah. It takes a while to recognize the personal mind, like to really be able to see the personal mind and differentiate it from, you know, the intentional thoughts, from the higher mind, higher intention, if you will.
Yeah.
I would also, you know, one thing that comes to mind, and Elizabeth, by the way, I mean, I think this is fantastic that you're bringing this up, because this is where the rubber hits the road, right?
Yeah.
But one thing I would ask is, you know, when you talk about the technique working or not working, at this point, we should only talk about that in the context of the very small stuff, right? So when most of the examples that have been brought up in this course have not been small stuff, right? It's been stuff where there's something going on the outside and I have to make some decision and I have to decide what to do. And it's bigger stuff. And it's completely unrealistic to expect this to so-called work, or even just to be able to do the technique in those situations. You have to learn to do it with the small stuff, with the smaller, the better, right?
Or isn't the small stuff very personal? What is small to me could be, isn't it like noticing the disturbances, the small disturbances?
Yes, yes, yeah, and we started the course with writing down a couple of things that you figure are small stuff that are only a 1 or a 2 on the 10-point intensity scale, right?
Mhm.
So you have to ask yourself, am I trying to make this work? You know, am I looking at a 1 or a 2, or am I looking at something bigger? Because if you're trying to make it work with something bigger, I mean, you can still learn from it, but the expectation's got to be that it's going to blow you away, right? So you're not going to be able to practice very well with it. And Mickey says, and I tend to agree, just as a general rule, if you have to do anything on the outside, if there's an actual outer problem that you have to deal with, then it's not small stuff, because one nice thing about the small stuff in terms of letting go of the thoughts is that you very quickly realize that you don't have to figure anything out, that it's really just an internal issue, right? And yet everything we've talked about here, the external has been the dominant, it's dominated the internal, right? It's the thing that you're most occupied with, that you're most fixated on in terms of fixing. And so right there, that's not easy. That's not small stuff. So, and the difference, as Susan says, this commitment to practice, it's really being on the lookout for the small stuff and not sort of waiting for a big disturbance to come up. And I'm not saying you're doing this, but a lot of people do, is not practice with the small stuff, wait until I'm really upset about something and then try and practice with it. And you're never going to be able to do that. You really have to start with the little teeny things that just bug you a little, that you don't have to fix on the outside. Like when Heidi described, her husband, watching the news all day long. You don't have to do anything about that. So I mean, that might be small stuff, depending on the intensity, right? If it's just a 1 or a 2 in you, then that's a great thing. That's a great small stuff, because it's all going on in your mind. There is no problem to fix on the outside, right? So Mark, you had a question, and then we should probably move on after that.
I noticed this week, I didn't know what to release. I noticed the disturbance,
Mhm.
and I was sort of in that place of being mindful of the disturbance, but I didn't know what it was I had to, how to do the release. You talk
Yeah.
about it being the mind, but
The release is the pull of the thoughts. It's the thoughts that are, the release is releasing the thoughts that are saying that you need to do something, that you need to figure something out, or you need to do something, right? So sometimes there's nothing to release. Sometimes it's just like, oh, I feel this, I feel this emotion, and there's really nothing going on. I just feel this emotion, and then it's just opening to it. And it's just relax and observe. There's no release, right? But other times the thoughts are trying to. So if you can think of this example, were there thoughts with it?
there was a body resistance or body reaction to, first, let's say, call it frustration.
Mm-hmm.
There was a thinking about what am I frustrated about,
Mm-hmm.
and but being aware of the frustration and sort of relaxing and allowing the frustration. I didn't know what it was I had to release, but what you're telling me now is you have three balls in the air, and you might do two of the three. I might go from relax to seat of awareness, and because, as you say, if release is specifically about my thoughts, but I'm having a body reaction to something, like there's a, the thought arrives and the speed of light goes into your body and you're having a reaction. So anyways,
yeah. Well, and it's the pull of the thoughts on your attention, because the idea is that in order to let it in, you need to be aware of what's going on, right? If you're not aware of what's going on, you're not gonna be practicing, right? You're gonna be just sort of on autopilot, right? So the idea is it's just relax, be aware and relax, right? The thoughts and this idea of having to figure out what to do, it sucks your attention into it. And it's like being in the movie theater and then getting absorbed in the movie. And as soon as you're absorbed, then you're on autopilot and you're not practicing anymore. So the release is intended to prevent your attention from being sucked into the disturbance and going into forgetfulness, into autopilot, right? And instead, so that release is don't let yourself get pulled in, and lean back is, to stay or move into the seat of awareness, right? So they're both focused on what's going on with your awareness, what's going on with your attention, right? Where is your awareness directed, right? And is there that meta awareness there? Is there that awareness of what you're doing, of what? So that's one part, and then the other part is just relax, stop defending, right? So you can think of it in that way. I often think of it in that way. Like it's two things. One is being aware of what's going on, and the second is not resisting. So at its simplest level, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to be aware and open to experience.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So in terms of the working with this idea of unconditioned happiness and not giving up our happiness, Mickey says, don't close your heart. It's never worth closing. And we've already practiced with that a little bit. And again, that's just a way to help us see what's going on, so that we're in awareness and we can relax or stop resisting. And he says, keep your mind disciplined. It will try and trick you into thinking this time it's worth closing. And so I'd like to do a breakout group around that, which is like, it's basically saying, like, when is happiness a choice, right? And when is happiness a choice? It's a choice when you see that it's a choice, right? It's your choice when you see that you're choosing to close. And then you can make another choice. But if you don't see that you're choosing to close, then you're on autopilot, basically, right? The closing is happening on autopilot instead of in awareness, right? So I guess the topic for discussion of the breakout group is, how does your mind trick you into saying this time it's worth closing? Like, I watched the recording from the last session 5, and someone was talking about how, their espresso was cold. And they were like, my espresso is cold. My espresso is cold. I'm so unhappy. My espresso is cold, right? And she saw how that made, you know, that was a decision. That was a decision. My espresso is cold, right? You don't have to be unhappy because your espresso is cold, but the mind tricked her into thinking that if her espresso was cold, she had to be unhappy about it because she doesn't like cold espresso, right? So how does your mind, maybe you can think of some examples and share an example of how does your mind trick you into closing, into being unhappy? Can you think of a situation where your mind says, this happened, so I'm unhappy, right? Is that clear? Yeah. Okay, so there's how many of us? 14. Okay, so I'll go into one of the breakout groups. Okay. Right. And here we go. So we'll have 5 minutes. Hey, Heidi. Oh, you're muted. Oh, I think you muted. Hey, Heidi. So what do you think?
Yes, yes, I had one of those. Yes. 5 minutes, that's a short answer. Yes, I had one of those.
Do you want to give an example?
Sure, I'll give an example. I had a really unpleasant conversation with somebody that I work with. And there was like a serious, one of those disagreements.
Mhm.
Whole thing of, there was a bunch of expectations, assumptions, and a whole bunch of crap that went down in this discussion. And, it got sort of louder and louder and, and in the end it was like, okay, stop. This needs space. This whole thing needs space. But my mind, of course, kept going on. And do I do something? Do I not do something? And everything. And I've just really enjoyed, I really kind of enjoyed today because I love this questions. Do I need to be angry or worried or hurt in order to deal with this effectively? And often for me, it's yes. Yeah, like that's what my mind tells me.
I didn't
Like,
even see that. That was in the chat.
yeah, you type them up. Do I need to do anything at all? What's the biggest problem right now? There was a bunch of stuff that got expressed. Somebody was unhappy with things that I did, unhappy with the way things are, and I get defensive, and same old story plays out again. But then I love this. Do I need to be angry or worried in order to deal with this effectively? No.
No. Yeah.
No. What I need to do is give it space. But even then,
Yeah.
it's not I need to do anything, it's like,
Right. But the space, like what I find is the space is what allows me to see that it's the personal mind, to see that the thoughts are not the truth, and that I don't have to follow them,
my teacher, I just listened to a whole satsang with my teacher where he was doing one of these things. Like he was a Kundalini guru. So when you talk about mantra, like I've actually had the actual experience of being blasted into another space just by listening to the vibration of the
Right.
words of him repeating it. But the one thing he kept saying in this satsang, and it was funny because there was a part of my mind, is mind does not exist. It is not real. And there's my rational mind keeps going, that's crap. Of course my mind exists, and of course it's real. And somehow when you were talking today, I just thought, yeah, how real is it, for God's sakes? You know,
I
and
mean,
at that moment, it kind of, it somehow with some of these things, it blasts you into another space, and you're kind of like, you're no longer, it no longer has a hold on you.
mhm, mhm.
But, you know, our mind's always trying to deal with the reality of it. You know, is this true? Is this not true? And
Well, the mind's always trying to find a place of comfort. Like chapter 14 is really, we haven't really talked about chapter 14, but it's this idea that the mind, that just sort of having this kind of, all these different things happening in our experience, and is very unsettling, and the mind wants to find safety. It wants to find something it can hold on to, that it can have a sense of orientation, that it can kind of have some control, right, some stability. And so the mind is always trying to find that, right? And it finds it every once in a while, but then it gets thrown off, and then it finds it, and then it gets thrown off, and it's just, and Mickey's saying, stop trying to find this, stop trying to find stability, let yourself float, let yourself, stop trying to control anything, right?
yeah, it's like free falling. Can you free fall?
Yeah,
You know, like,
yeah,
can you
but
free it? To me, the whole thing is that mindfulness thing of, is it's pleasant, unpleasant, neutral. And can you sit in equanimity with all of that and not try to constantly get back to, I want it to be pleasant, or at least neutral? I wanted to ask you though, you're an MBSR person. How does this relate to the whole thing about responding and reacting? Because when people kept talking about these situations, I kept thinking of, the training in MBSR is always like, you have a choice. And with awareness, when you're reacting, which goes into the unconscious, blah, blah, blah. But then it's as if responding becomes the better choice. It is a better choice
yeah,
in
well,
that model.
yeah, well, I would say that anything that comes from the personal mind is reacting, and anything that comes from the higher mind is responding, right? And anything that comes from an awareness, from seeing through the thoughts and recognizing that they're just thoughts and they're just emotions, and actually, I can implement a practice here, that's responding, right? Or not even implement a practice, but it might be, a decision in the outside world, right? But the idea is that you're coming from a place of peace and perspective, and 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 ultimately from a place of non-separation, right? You're not worried about yourself anymore. You're asking what's the best thing to do for all concerned, right?
So
Mickey talks
that's
about
what
that
I
all.
was saying when you were dealing with this. It's like somehow it's, where do you put your eye? What are you identified with?
Yeah, and he's saying identify with awareness.
Identify, yeah.
It's
Identify.
it's the only safe harbor. So welcome back, everyone. I guess Brian will be back soon. His internet connection's bad, so it doesn't always come back so fast. Okay, anyone want to share how your mind tricks you into thinking that this time it's worth closing?
Well, Andrea and I talked about the real fear and worry of friends in the US,
Mm-hmm.
and how there is this real worry, and how initially you feel compelled not to be worried. But I then thought that if the worry and concern is there for your friends, then that is what you let in, and not fight the fear of their safety, and their health and well-being, but just allow that worry to be.
Yeah.
It's a bit like being compassionate, like having a compassionate heart, opening the heart to being compassionate for those who, and us as well, who have concern and some pain and suffering. But there's a so I'm not sure if I'm letting things in or resisting feeling the pain of that.
Well, yeah, and that's an experiential thing, right? And you can just notice, like, am I resisting? But again, it's about having an open heart. This is why it's not about being happy, right? So it's not that you're happy in that situation. It's that you're concerned, you're motivated by compassion, but you don't, but you're not telling yourself this is a terrible situation and I'm not going to be happy as long as this situation persists, right? That's where the mind tricks you. That's what he's talking about here, is the mind saying, I'm not going to be happy because of what's going on, as opposed to, I'm going to I have this fear, I have this worry, I'm going to let it in, I'm going to feel it, I'm going to let it pass through me. And, I'm going to do my best to come from a place of compassion and da 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 da. But I'm, whatever's going on, I'm going to let it in, and I'm going to keep my heart open. I'm going to keep my heart open, right? Because you can let in everything with an open heart. It's the closed heart that's defending against like that. That is like what a closed heart means, is you're defending. Closed heart is a defensive position. And and what characterizes a closed heart, in addition to sort of negative, the world going negative, and the world going negative doesn't mean like I'm experiencing fear. It means the world goes negative as in you become very focused on yourself, right? And survival. And it's like, this is the point where it's like, as they say, everyone for themselves, right? It's the sure, you go into survival mode, and it's like, there is no compassion. It's just animal. It's just
is there a synonym for the word happiness that would, I find it a little Shangri-La-ish.
Yeah. I mean, the one, open heart is the thing that I think of the most. I mean, or just openness generally, right? It's the idea that you're open, you're letting the experience in. Closing is your defending. That's the main thing. Are you letting things in, or are you defending?
Thank you.
Yeah. So just to quickly, we only have like 5 minutes left. So I mean, chapter 14, letting go of false solidity, it's just sort of a continuation of this idea of a mental model and how we build the starting point is it's clinging, and we cling because we're uncomfortable. We want to control the situation. We want to feel this sense of stability. And so we kind of create this stability by building this mental model. And it's a false stability because, of course, we can't control the world. We can't control other people. And so, it's explaining kind of how we build this mental model. And I think it's a very actually advanced practice, because it's, you really have to see the very subtle way that you cling. It's something, so I wouldn't worry about it too much. The big thing is just, it might be helpful in recognizing the personal mind, because that really is, a key part of the practice is just being able to see the personal mind. And that's why the asking, is this worth closing? It helps to see the personal mind in action, right? It's like, well, if I'm closing, then the personal mind must be the one telling me to do that, right? Because that's the ego, right? And then chapter 16, I love chapter 16. I find it's a great summary of the whole practice. Focusing on the idea that there's this will that the will is powerful, and that we use it to resist life. And to really notice how we do that, and then don't use the will, drop the hands, keep them at your side, just let life, do whatever it will to you. I'm not saying in the outer world, I'm saying in the inner world, right? In the inner world. And this idea that we don't actually resist life happening because we can't, right? Somebody says something, we've already heard it, right? It's come in, but then we resist it in our thoughts and emotions. We don't want to accept it, right? We don't want to feel it. So then the resistance is actually on the inside. And of course, you've already heard it, you've already seen it, they've already done it. So resisting on the inside is kind of pointless, and it just results in storing it, of course. There was a great quote in the chapter. He says, everyone is attempting to deal with the world around them while struggling with their own reactions and personal preferences. So it's this distinction between the inner and the outer, and seeing that the inner disturbance complicates dealing with the outer world. Because the question I hear from people so often is, well, don't I have to deal with the outer world? And it's like, yes, but you can deal with it so much better if you deal with the inner first. And seeing the difference between the outer and the inner, recognizing that when something happens and it creates a disturbance, what's causing the disturbance is my mind, my samskaras, right? Not what's going on in the outer world. I mean, I'm not talking about when somebody's cutting your arm off. I'm talking about most of what disturbs us, right? So, and you can see things as a challenge rather than seeing them as a problem, right? I mean, you look at sports, right? If you don't want to play a team that is terrible and that you can just beat them every time, challenges is kind of a big part of life, right? And it can be an exciting part of life and a very fulfilling part of life. So when things don't go, or when things are not as you want, can you see that as a challenge? When there's a situation to deal with on the outside world, can you see it as a challenge instead of a problem, right? And so this is the admonition from Mickey is to see it as a challenge and not as a problem. And he says something like, he says, the only time there are going to be no problems is, when you, he says it much better than I'm remembering it, but he says the only way that there can be no problems is if you don't see anything as a problem, right? You see things as a challenge instead of a problem. And in this practice, that's a key part of the practice, that we're just practicing. It's just a game. We're just trying to learn. We're just trying to understand. We're not attached to the outcome, right? And whatever's going on, whatever disturbance is going on, can you see it as an opportunity to learn to let go rather than a problem, right? And as soon as you see it that way, oh, this is an opportunity to learn to let go, then it changes the context entirely. And it's so much easier to practice because you've got that clarity that what I am trying to do here is learn to let go. I'm not trying to make it go away. I'm not trying to solve the outer problem. I'm just practicing relaxing and being in awareness, basically, right? I'm just practicing learning to let go of the resistance. So it's 9 o'clock, and so the homework this week is really working with this idea of not giving up your happiness. Asking, is this worth closing? It's a key part of it, and not seeing things as problems. As well as the sitting meditation is not knowing, similar to the one we did tonight. And again, working with the small stuff and really focusing on the small stuff. right? Really doing your best to notice when there's small stuff and work with that and make that the most important part of your practice. Noticing the small stuff and working with it. And I also put in a document, it's a presentation I once did, and I thought maybe it would be helpful, and it's called Is Happiness a Choice? So it kind of goes through when happiness is choice and how to, it's a little complicated. I don't know if it's helpful, but I thought I haven't used it for other classes, but have a look and let me know if you think it's at all useful. And that's it. So, and if anyone wants to stay, if anyone has any questions you want to ask me, or anything you want to share, just please stay on, and that's it. And if you're if you have a consultation coming up and you haven't scheduled it yet, please do, because Sunday's the last day. Okay. Thanks, everyone. Lovely seeing you.
Thank you.
And thank you for challenging me. I love being challenged. I not just I love being challenged, but I'm glad that you can feel free to share that. Like that you feel it's a safe enough space to do that. So thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Have a nice
Good
night.
night.
Lori, did you say that this Sunday